The Unknowable. The Herbert Spencer Lecture by George Santayana, delivered at Oxford, 24th of October, 1923. Your kind invitation to deliver the Herbert Spencer Lecture this year, apart from the honor and pleasure it brings me, enables me to perform a small act of piety. On the whole, with qualifications which will appear presently, I belong to Herbert Spencer's camp, and I am glad of so favorable an opportunity to offer a grain of proprietary incense to his shade, which I feel to be wandering in our midst, somewhat reproachfully. Fashion has completely deserted him, and the course of evolution in which he trusted has not taken his hints. Even where some philosophy of evolution is still in vogue, it is not his philosophy, but perhaps that of Hegel or Bergson, who conceive evolution as imposed on nature by some magic or dialectical force, contrary to an alleged helplessness in matter. Such devices were far removed from the innocence of Herbert Spencer, who dutifully gathered reports from every quarter and let them settle as they would in the broad levels of his system, as in geological strata, whence that Homeric sweep with which he pictures progress and decay, not in aversion from the severities of natural existence, but as the mechanical sediment of the tides of matter and motion perpetually surging. Of course, this epic movement, as Spencer describes it, is but a human perspective. He instinctively imposes his grandiloquent rhythms on things as he does his ponderous Latin vocabulary, or as Empedocles or Lucretius impose their hexameters. But that is the case with every human system. It is and can be nothing but human discourse. Science and philosophy cast a net of words into the sea of being, happy in the end if they draw anything out besides the net itself, with some holes in it. The meshes of Spencer's net were not subtle. 1,000 amiable human things slipped through them like water, and compared with the studied entanglements of more critical systems, it seemed scandalously coarse and wide. Yet they caught the big fish. When I rub my eyes and look at things candidly, it seems evident to me that this world is the sort of world described by Herbert Spencer, not the sort of world described by Hegel or Bergson. At heart, these finer philosophers, like Plato, are not seeking to describe the world of our daily plotting and commerce, but to supply a visionary interpretation of it, a refuge from it in some contrasted spiritual assurance, where the sharp facts vanish into a clarified drama or a pleasant trance. Far be it from me to deride the imagination, poetical or dialectical, but after all, it is a great advantage for a system of philosophy to be substantially true. In political speculation, too, the times have turned their back on Herbert Spencer. Everything he saw waxing is now visibly waning. Liberalism, individualism, faith in science, complacency at recent progress, assurance of further progress to come. Doubtless it is fortunate for those who are not philosophers to share unreservedly the spirit of their age. It must be exhilarating to stand on the hilltops and point the way to future generations, when you are confident that future generations must anyhow take that road. Such prophets have their reward. They have seemed leaders in their day. They remain its representatives, and hereafter they may prove a landmark to the historian, or a find for the antiquary. Time also has its revenges, and after an honest man has been laughed at for a century or two as a simpleton or a scholastic, his turn may come round again, and he may find keen advocates, and young defenders. But frankly, if in some respects Herbert Spencer's views have so soon grown obsolete, I think he deserved his fate. A philosopher should not be subject to the mood of the age in which he happens to be born. When a man swims to imminence and to joyous conviction on the crest of that wave, he must expect to be left high and dry at the ebb tide. A believer in evolution is indeed justified in assuming that the latest view and the latest practice are the best so far. But in consistency, he must admit that the next view and subsequent practice will be better still, so that his real faith is pinned by anticipation on an ultimate view and an ultimate practice, in which evolution will reach its goal. Evolution, in the proper sense of this word, is not a mere flux expected to be endless. Evolution must have a goal. It must unfold a germ in a determinate direction towards an implicit ideal. Otherwise, there would be no progress involved, no means of distinguishing changes for the better from changes for the worse. I think it was a merit in Spencer to admit that evolution will culminate in a state from which any deviation would be decay. And he not only admitted such a goal in the abstract, but conveyed it clearly. The goal was vital equilibrium, the adjustment and adaptation of living beings to their environment, or of their environment to them. The end of progress was harmony, that celestial harmony spoken of by a very different philosopher, which ran through all the gamut of the worlds. The diapason ending full, not exactly in man, but in any and every creature that might achieve a perfect harmony in nature. This confirms what I was saying just now about a system of philosophy. This philosophy of evolution, for instance, being but a human perspective. For the reindeer or the polar bear, evolution culminated in the general period. It culminated in the cities of Greece for one sort of man. It will culminate in other perfections if there is plasticity enough in living creatures to adapt them to their conditions before these conditions have passed away. Evolution, for any observer, will mean that strain in the total movement of nature which has ministered to the formation of his spirit and to its full expression. It is not, however, as a philosopher of evolution or as a political prophet that I wish to consider Herbert Spencer. I should like to confine myself, if it were possible, to one point in his system, not especially characteristic of his age, nor of ours, a point in which he seems to me to have been a true philosopher, such as any age might produce. For if nature has made a man observant, intelligent, and speculative, the times cannot prevent him from being so. I refer to his belief in a substance which by its secret operation in infinite modes kindles experience, so that all phenomena as they appear and all minds observing these appearances are secondary facts, and not, as is often alleged, the fundamental or only realities. On the contrary, any experience is incidental to animal life and animal passions, which in turn are incidental to the general flux of substance in the world. Appearances and feelings and consciousness itself are in their nature desultory and unsubstantial, yet not groundless nor altogether mad, because substance creates and sustains them by its steady rhythms, so that they are truly expressive, and when intelligence arises, may become terms and symbols in true knowledge. This is, of course, no new doctrine, but as old as the hills. It is an opinion which any man, if not otherwise prejudiced or indoctrinated, might well come to by himself. It was embraced by Spencer as a matter of course, and held perhaps all the more resolutely because he was not too respectful of academic tradition. Had he been expert in metaphysics and educated at a university, he might have missed the obvious. Unfortunately, in wishing to pick out from Spencer's system this one ancient and familiar belief, and to defend it, I am arrested at once by an untoward circumstance. Herbert Spencer called this substance beneath all appearances the unknowable. This negative appellation is evidently drawn from a critical and subjective philosophy, such as Spencer's was not. It belongs to the vocabulary of disappointment. It is a romantic word. It transports us far from the region of eager inquiry, experiment, statistics, miscellaneous information, and scientific enlightenment in which Spencer's other theories have bloomed. Why this anomaly? Why any metaphysical preference at all to a work of straightforward natural philosophy? I think the reason was that Spencer, not being by nature a logician, bowed in logic to casual authorities, and relied too much, in this subject too, on the fashion of the hour. He supposed, as some do today, that the latest logic was the last. Dean Mansell, Sir William Hamilton, and Kant would never be superseded. He hardly considered the atmosphere, the implications, or the contradictions of the doctrines he quoted from those worthies. He appealed to them on one point in order to discredit all their other arguments. Metaphysics should be proved out of the mouths of the metaphysicians themselves to be incompetent to revise his scientific speculations or to refute his conclusions. He hardly cared, therefore, if the language of his metaphysical preface was that of his natural enemies, and perverse essentially, seemed almost an advantage, since it locked the gates against those enemies with their own bolts. Yet words are weapons, and it is dangerous in speculation, as in politics, to borrow them from the arsenal of the enemy. In consenting to call substance unknowable, Spencer exposed himself to the derisive question how, if substance was unknowable, he ever came to know of its existence. Indeed, if the epithet were taken strictly, it would positively contradict and abolish belief in that tremendous reality on which he bestowed it, partly perhaps in reverence, and partly in haste to be done with reverence and to come to business. But Spencer did not take the epithet strictly, since he spoke of modes of the unknowable and regarded phenomena everywhere as its manifestations. And if we take the word knowledge in its natural sense, of which I shall speak presently, it is hard to see how anything could be better revealed than by being manifested everywhere. The fact is that relative and oblique designations, such as the unknowable or the unconscious, cannot be taken strictly. They cannot be intended to describe anything in its proper nature, but only in its accidental relation to something else, to a would-be knower who is unable to know it, or to an ulterior sensibility which as yet has not arisen. Nothing can be intrinsically unknowable, for if anyone was tempted to imagine a substance such that it should antecedently defy description, inasmuch as that substance had no assignable character, he would be attributing existence to a non-entity. It would evidently make no difference in the universe whether a thing without any character were added to it or were taken away. If substance is to exist, it must have a character distinguishing it from nothing, and also from everything else. In saying this, I do not mean to ignore those renowned philosophers who have maintained that the entire essence of substance is pure being. I can easily conceive that in some other world, pure being should be all in all. Pure being is itself a particular essence, the simplest essence of all, clearly distinguishable, both in definition and in experience, from every other essence, and loudly contrary to nothing with which Hegel would identify it. Not, I think, honestly, as if pure being, by chance, were the essence of substance. Substance would be so far from unknowable that it would be thoroughly well known, and we should always carry with us, as Spinoza observes, an adequate idea of it. That the substance of this world has a far more elaborate nature, I believe, can be easily proved, but I cannot enter here into that argument. It is easy to conceive, however, that the intrinsic nature of substance may be very recondite and very rich, so that the human mind has no occasion and no capacity to observe it adequately, and this perhaps comes nearer to Spencer's intention in calling it unknowable. In this sense, not only God, but the remoter parts of space and time, and probably the depths of matter, would be unknowable to man. Even then, however, the intrinsic nature of substance could offer no resistance to being discovered if any one had the means and the wit to do so, and if substance remains largely unknown to mankind, the reason will not be any recalcitrancy on its part, but rather a casual coincidence in ourselves of curiosity with blindness, so that we earnestly desire to search the depths of substance, but cannot. In this measure, the emotion suggested by the term unknowable is a legitimate emotion. It expresses an integral part of the tragedy involved in being finite and mortal, perhaps in being a mind or spirit at all. Poets and philosophers sometimes talk as if life were an entertainment, a feast of ordered sensations, but the poets, if not the philosophers, know too well in their hearts that life is no such thing. It is a predicament. We are caught in it. It is something compulsory, urgent, dangerous, and tempting. We are surrounded by enormous, mysterious, only half friendly forces. This is our experience in the dilemmas of conduct, in religion, in science, and in the arts. So that the usual sequel to agnosticism, when impatient people deny the unknown exists, far from being a rational simplification, is a piece of errant folly. One of those false exits in the comedy of thought which, though dramatic, are ignominious, because the mind must revert from them to the beginning of the scene and play it over again on some other principle. All the reasons that originally suggested the belief in substance remain unimpaired, and suggest the same belief again and again. We are not less dependent than our forefathers on food, on circumstances, and on our own bodies. The incubus of the not ourselves is not lifted from us. Or, if in some respects we have acquired a greater dominion over nature, this only adds positive knowledge of substance to the dumb sense we had before of its environing presence. How far this understanding of substance shall go depends on the endowment of the proposed knower, and on the distance, scale, and connections of the things he is attempting to describe. How far knowledge is possible, therefore, can never be determined without first knowing the circumstances, and the very notion of knowledge, by which I do not mean mere feeling or consciousness, but the cognizance which one existence can take of another, is a notion that never could be framed without confident experience of sundry objects known and of persons able to know them. In saying this, I am not merely expressing my own view of the matter. I am thinking of the agnosticism prevalent in Spencer's generation. It was no general skepticism. It did not, even in Kant, challenge the possibility of knowledge on account of the audacious claim which all transitive or informing knowledge puts forth in professing to report and describe something absent. On the contrary, such transitive and informing knowledge was still assumed to exist. The essential miracle of it was not denied because it was not noticed. Everybody was assumed to know his own past, not merely to imagine it. Everybody was assumed to know, not merely to imagine, the conscious existence of others, and the laws and phenomena of nature ad infinitum. But all these known facts, however remote and unobservable, were phenomena that had appeared, or might have appeared, to some human mind. What was condemned never to be known was only the environment of this experience, which experience had always supposed it possessed and observed, and which had been called matter, God, or the natural world. Yet the existence of these objects was not denied. Had there really been no God, no matter, and no natural world, I do not see how incapacity to discover them could have been called agnosticism. The agnostic was haunted by ghosts of substance, filling his whole experience with a sense of discomfort, ignorance, and defeat. Those substances were real but elusive, and though he never saw them, the agnostic remembered only too well the tales once told concerning them, and secretly desired to have assurance of their truth. Only he thought such assurance was eternally denied him by his psychological constitution. As speech has been called a means of concealing thought, so knowledge was a screen cutting off reality. Evidently, this agnosticism, besides assuming true knowledge of much absent experience, presupposed accurate knowledge of the human mind and its categories, conceived to be unalterable. And it also presupposed a definition of that veiled reality definite enough to assure us that no definition of it would ever be given. So much sure knowledge at home had a tendency to console the agnostic for his ignorance abroad. If metaphysics had closed its doors upon him, science was inviting him to a feast. Science was then believed to be so clear and unquestionable, and practically so beneficent, that human life would presently be filled to the brim with busy knowledge, busy wealth, and busy happiness. Mankind being thus happily occupied, like the busy bee, would have no reason to regret its ignorance of what did not concern it. Yet this contentment and agnosticism, so wise in its humility and so natural in the age of material progress, is fatal sooner or later to agnosticism itself. If you are not a wistful and distressed agnostic, you will forget before long that you are an agnostic at all. Why should you believe in those ghosts of substance if you never see them? There were once, or there seemed to be, substantial and formidable realities which everybody was sure of: God, matter, the natural world. But after literary psychology had proved that you could know nothing but your own ideas, and you found that, in spite of your incredulity, these ideas continued to flow as pleasantly as ever, what reason could you have to imagine the existence of anything else? Thus the agnostic, who has lost his sense of bereavement, will readily revert to dogmatism. He will relapse into the innocent habit of mind which regards what we see as existing substantially and what we do not see as nothing. You will not expect me, in these few minutes, to discuss the logic of idealism, but it is interesting to note how two important phases of this logic reappear in Spencer. One phase is the Socratic doctrine that knowledge is recognition. To know a thing, according to this view, is to be able to say what it is. In other words, to name and to classify it. The logical conclusion from this was drawn by Plato. He saw that the only true objects of knowledge were the types of being which we recognize things to possess. These types could be called ideas. Earthly and transitory things could be understood only insofar as one or another of these ideas was illustrated in them, or at least suggested by them in their confusion and imperfection. There is a curious approximation to this view in the Spencerian cosmology, where various principles of evolution are traced through all departments of nature and represented as a sort of framework of eternal necessity on which the frail web of phenomena is stretched and must be stretched in all future time. Law is the modern equivalent for the ideas of Plato. There is no reason, save the plastic habit of the Hellenic imagination, why forms of motion or of relation should not have been counted amongst Platonic ideas as honorably as the forms of animals or the categories of language. The radical divergence of modern rationalism from that of antiquity comes at another point. The modern is an agnostic in his idealism. He is subjective. He cannot believe that the laws that hold the world together are its true substance. They seem to him evidently figments of the mind, and he is driven to put substance in some nearer plane, a plane which on Socratic principles would be unknowable, since only laws or types of being can be defined in thought. The other phase of idealistic logic, which enters into Spencer's agnosticism, is sensualism, or the doctrine that the only object of knowledge is the datum of sense. It is usual to identify this datum of sense, which is properly a visionary essence, with the sensation which reveals it, a sensation which is an event in somebody's personal experience and an historical fact. Sensations will then seem to be the substantial facts, for although they will remain unknowable in the sense of being indefinable, they will be felt and found, each at its own time, and this is the empirical criterion of reality and knowledge. But it is not clear how one sensation can know another, or in what medium. If sensations are the only reality, they can arise or can be related, and a bottomless abyss of skepticism opens before anyone who takes the doctrine seriously that nothing can exist except sensations, each knowing itself only. Spencer was spared these perplexities by his robust faith in substance. Deeply influenced as he was by his idealistic friends, he could not forget that sensations had roots. They expressed bodily states and effects of the environment, but as only laws or Platonic types could be defined, and only sensations could be felt, and as feeling and defining were the sole ways of knowing admitted by the two schools of idealistic logic. Spencer was confirmed in his conviction that only appearances were knowable. To be known in either of those ways is incongruous with the nature of substance. This fact does not militate against its existence. It militates against the illusion that anything existent can be known in either of those ways. What jurisdiction can any feeling have, or any logic, over what shall arise or not arise in the universe. Even when we assert that the self-contradictory cannot exist, I suppose what we mean, if we are reasonable, is that some notion of ours which contradicts itself cannot be the true or complete description of the object we mean to describe by it. But often the objects to which we attempt to apply such notions are the things most indubitably existing in the world, such, for instance, as motion, and as this very fact of knowledge which we are now trying to understand. Motion and knowledge are facts perfectly notorious and familiar, although several great philosophers deny them to be possible, because the definitions they have given of them are self-contradictory. It is nothing against the existence of such things that they should be inexpressible in the terms of a particular logic, or unknowable to a stone. The lack of possible communication between two creatures is not necessarily a reproach to either, even when they are sensitive and are intelligent enough to take their sensations for signs of an external agent. The connection may be too slight, or the scale too different, for mutual knowledge to be possible or important. But when it is important, it is usually possible. We need but to sharpen our wits and shake our minds loose from prejudice, trying new categories until we come nearer to the heart of those substantial, dynamic objects which confront us in action. This approach need not be by a miraculous divination of their essence, although when the object recognized is a mind like our own, such literal divination is not impossible. Usually, however, the approach is by refinements of adaptation, as in the moods and tenses of verbs, or the application of mathematics to nature. There is no similarity established of a pictorial sort between the symbol in the fancy and the fact in the world, but only a methodical correspondence in some one direction. If, however, we find that our senses and our logic are obdurate and incapable of further adaptations, we may reflect that all knowledge of fact, by its very privilege of transcending the data, is condemned to be external and symbolical, and that the most plastic and penetrating intellect, being still an animal function, will never discover the whole of things, either in their extent or in their structure. Things will not be unknown, since notice will have been taken of them, and their appearance, in some respect, will have been recorded. We shall understand that there is one strain, at least, in their constitution and movement, fitted to provoke our perception and to render our description applicable and correct. Even that intrinsic character of things which remains undiscovered or inexpressible in our particular language is a perfectly knowable character, and will be disclosed at any moment in any particular, if a new observer turned up with the requisite organs and a more sympathetic imagination. Calling substance unknowable, then, is like calling a drum inaudible, for the shrewd reason that what you hear is the sound and not the drum. It is a play on words, and little better than a pun, in the sense in which what is heard is the sound, hearing is intuition. In the sense in what is heard is the drum, hearing is an instance of animal faith, of that sort of perception which includes understanding and readiness to assume much that is not perceived, and to act on that assumption. Clearly, if nature had confined our cognitive powers to intuition of absolute data, and we were incorrigibly aesthetic idiots, substance would be unknowable to us. But in that case, we should not be agnostics about substance, since we should not have the least inkling that such a thing might exist, nor the least notion of its nature. But mankind has always had ideas of matter, of God, or the gods, and of a natural world, full of hidden processes and powers. These objects, just because they existed, were necessarily removed from intuition, but everybody knew the quarter in which they lay, and the circle of experiences in which each of them was manifested. Everybody knew what he meant by believing in them, and what sort of things they would be if it was really on them, and not on something quite different, that his action was directed. For instance, at this moment, not being able to discard the rude logic of my animal ancestors, I think I find indications before me of the four walls of this room and of you sitting within them, both you and the walls being possessed of a substantial existence. That is, having existed prior to my arrival in Oxford, and existing apart even now from my summary intuitions of you, vague symbols to me of your being and of your presence. Nor does the equal substantiality which I attribute to you and to the walls at all imply an identity of nature between the two. On the contrary, I should be utterly lacking in sanity as well as in civility if I now turn my back upon you and address the wall. Yet on the hypothesis that my perceptions do not convey knowledge of substance, but are intuitions of pure ideas, it would be equally vain to address myself to you or to the wall, since in either case I should be haranguing my own sensations. The fact that substantial and substantially different realities must be posited beyond myself and my data, one sort amenable to persuasion and the other deaf, is something I assume because the enterprise of life in me at this moment demands that I should do so. I am pledged by my instant adventure and by the general art of living, which has a groundless ascendancy over all animals, to take for granted that you are sitting there, admirable in your patience and inscrutable in your thoughts, and that just as in speaking to you I posit your substantial existence, so you in your turn are kindly positing mine, over and above the volatile sounds which you actually hear, and I am sure you are intelligently recognizing me and my thoughts very much for what we really are. Thus, the Spencerian unknowable is unknowable only to idealists, who identify knowledge with intuition, and, if they are consistent, deny the capacity of thought to indicate anything external, whether an event, a substance, or another actual thought. But these objects, withdrawn from intuition, are the objects of daily knowledge and of science, and Spencer believed he knew them very well. The scruples that made him substitute the word unknowable for the word force, or the word force for the word matter, were the scruples of an idealist, such as he did not intend to be. They sprang from the orbit of reducing things to their adventitious relation to ourselves, the habit of egotism, as if the difficulty we may have in approaching them could constitute their intrinsic being. There was, however, a motive of quite another sort leading Spencer to disguise the substance of things under the name of the unknowable. He wished to reconcile science with religion. It is easy to deride this pretension in one who had so little sympathy with religious institutions and with religious experience. Religion in the mass of mankind has never been a mere sense of mystery. It has been a positive belief and an experimental effort directed on the means of salvation. A prophet, conscious of some promise or warning conveyed to him miraculously, cannot substitute for the specific faith and official assurance that science will never quite succeed in dissipating the mystery of things. It is not what he will never know that interests him, but what he thinks he has discovered. Genuine religion professes to have positive knowledge and to bring positive benefits. It is an art, and to ask it to be satisfied with knowing that no knowledge can penetrate to the heart of things is sheer mockery. The opposite is what religion instinctively asserts. Like science, religion is solid only insofar as by faith and art, the two wings of true knowledge, it can really survey human destiny and reveal the divine decrees on which human destiny depends. And yet I think that Herbert Spencer, in throwing somewhat contemptuously that sop to religion, was in fact silently reconciling religion with science, behind his back and without suspecting it. The substance envisaged in science and that envisaged in religion have always been the same. The paths of discovery are different, but if they convey true knowledge, they must ultimately converge upon the same facts, on the same ground of necessity in things, and the recognition of universal substance, far removed from the imagination and the will of men, yet creating this will and imagination at the appropriate places, and giving them their natural scope. There lies a quite positive religion, and by no means a new one. Substance, if we admit it at all, is by definition the source of our life and the dispenser to us of good and evil. Respect for it, then, is the beginning of wisdom, and harmony with it is the sign of salvation. I do not mean to suggest that all religion is addressed to such a real and formidable object. There are strains of religion of quite another quality. There is, for instance, a rapturous strain, the impulse to praise, to sing, to mythologize, to escape from all the limitations and cares of mortality into an ecstatic happiness. But I ask myself this question: what would ecstasy be but madness if it were not the voice of a substantial harmony with the substance of things and with its movement? Though substance may be forgotten, and only light and music may seem to remain, it is the massive harmonies in substance that justify those mystic feelings, if anything justifies them at all. If the spheres did not revolve according to law, the morning stars would not sing together, and the God of Aristotle would not think his eternal thoughts. Even enthusiasm, therefore, when not vapid, expresses respect for substance and happy union with its motion. Those prosaic terms of Spencer's, adaptation and equilibrium, really express admirably the basis of the most ecstatic emotions when they are healthy and deserving of a place in human economy. It would be a sad compliment to pay to religion to identify it with fatuous and ephemeral heats, divorced from all perception of substance and of its true fertility. Religion of the sober, practical, manly sort, Roman piety, is emphatically reverence for the nature of things, for the ways of substance. How far such manly piety may have been misled by superstition or by hasty and sentimental science, so as to distort the laws of the world and found a false religion, is a question of fact for sober science to examine. If a traditional deity proves to be a living power, if it is the whole or part of the substance actually confronting us, then serious piety will revere that deity and meditate on its ways. If, on the contrary, the only substance that controls our destiny or can reward our obedience is a natural substance, manifested in all nature and plastic to common arts, then a serious piety will study the ways and sing the praises of this natural substance. Piety is on the side of belief. The existence of substance is the basis of piety. To set up in the place of substance any spontaneous ideas or pert exigencies of our own is contrary to religion. A mind that professes to create matter, to create truth, and to create itself is a satanic mind. At least Lucifer and the ancient skeptics were disinterested and disdained a world in which they did not believe. But modern rebels, religious or political, are without asceticism. Like Dr. Faustus, they are crammed with pretentious learning. They trust in magic and in their own will, covet all experience, and hanker for the promised land. But they will never see it except in a mirage if, in contempt of substance, they merely command it to appear. There is a maxim which counsels a man lost in a wood to walk on steadily in any one direction, no matter which, lest by turning and turning in a circle, he should never come out into the open. Spencer might have followed this maxim to advantage, and by sticking to his own cosmic principles, he might have arrived at a theory of substance and of knowledge which would have been adequate to the facts, and potentially just also to the experience and logic of idealism, which are pathetically human, without departing at any point from the method of external observation or the doctrine of natural evolution. Knowledge, whatever else it may be, is certainly an incident in life. If all other things were dead, no one of them could know another, much less itself. Now, of the nature of life, Spencer had a very just, if external, conception. Life is a form of adaptation, a moving equilibrium, an adjustment of inner to outer relations. If a dog winces when struck, he is alive and has felt the blow. If a fly, when you try to catch it, escapes by flight, it has perceived the hand descending upon it. I am far from wishing to maintain a behaviorist psychology, or to say that in such observable cases of knowledge, there is nothing that is not observable. On the contrary, I believe that every natural event has several ontological dimensions. It moves in the realm of matter, it is definable in the realm of truth, perhaps it flashes and burns for a moment in the realm of spirit, forming an actual feeling or thought. But the material facts, which biology might survey, are sufficient to determine the distribution of life and knowledge, as well as the distribution of all other dimensions and values which the facts may involve. The state of our organs determines our sensations, our actions, or our perceptible impulses to act, determine our passions. Our words enact and define our thoughts. Knowledge in its natural basis, bearing with it all its spiritual accompaniments, is thus a perfectly ascertainable fact of natural history. It is a relation of living bodies to their environment, such that the acts and words flowing from the body fit their external occasions, changing in a way relevant to these occasions, but prompted by the native impulses of those bodies. Apart from such external justifications, there would be no telling whether the inner visions of any mind were knowledge or not. Intrinsically, they are dream images in any case, and they would never be anything more if directly or indirectly, by the action which accompanies them, they found no point of application in the material world. The question, what is knowable and what unknowable to any animal, is accordingly easily answered by a biologist enjoying the requisite faculties for observation. If an animal possesses organs capable of discriminating response to a determinate thing, that animal can know this thing. If, on the contrary, the presence of this thing in influencing the animal materially does not stimulate any reaction focused upon that thing, any turning or visible contemplation or defensive movement or pursuit, then the thing in question is unknowable to that particular animal and can never become an object of its thought, action, or desire. In the first case, when a fit reaction occurs, any sensuous image or any logical system which might then fill the mind would express that reaction, and this expression would not be meaningless to the active animal in whom it arose. We would instinctively understand it to be the voice of the substance confronting him, his opposite partner in the dance, having announced its presence and provoked its host some reaction of sense or fancy. That neighbor substance will have revealed itself in the only way in which anything existent and collateral can be revealed at all, by producing some slight disturbance, which in an active animal calls attention to its source, so that the intruder acquires a reputation for good or ill and a character in the social world. Human experience is filled full with such appropriate comments on neighboring modes of substance, and with appropriate names and sketches clapped upon events. Among these signs and tokens there are some especially venerable symbols, those same ideas already mentioned of matter, of God, of the natural world, of various persons and passions. These venerable symbols are characters attributed to substance and its modes by the human imagination. After long experience and much puzzled reflection, the degree of truth and precision which they may possess will naturally vary, partly with the articulation they receive. The more articulate, the truer or the falser they will become, and partly with the range of substantive being to which they are applied. Intrinsically, they are all poetic ideas, fictions of the fancy, a fact which does not prevent them from being true symbolically and even literally, if they are so happily framed as to attribute no character which substance does not actually possess. When people discuss the existence of matter or the existence of God, the problem does not seem to me to be well stated. It is as if we began to discuss the existence of our friends and the material locus in which we place the persons of our acquaintance. There is undoubtedly something, not something of any sort, but a mode of substance, with precisely the active powers exerted upon us from that quarter. This reality is no less real than ourselves, being in dynamic interplay with the substance of our own being. To deny the reality of one's friends, though possible to a determined skeptic, is idle and in the end dishonest, because we can be sure of nothing and can believe nothing if we do not allow ourselves to believe and to be sure that we are in contact with the substance, not ourselves when we fight, love, or talk. This substance may be recognized and named without being at all comprehended. Merely the different instincts awakened in its presence may suffice to distinguish it clearly, as when a child says John, mother, dog. It does not follow that these names, and the sentiment each mutely awakens, are similar to the substance they indicate, or form any part of that substance. Even the barking of the dog, not to speak of the dog himself, is not very like the bow wow of the childish vocabulary. I see no necessity that our ideas of matter or of God should be truer than that, yet they have substantial and unequivocal objects. If, for instance, in denying that persons exist, a philosopher like Buddha had meant that the idea we commonly form of persons does not rightly describe the substance at work in those places, he might have been more than justified. A supposed spiritual substance, called the soul, is not easily to be found there. But he could hardly have maintained his negation if he had meant that there is no substance of any sort for which the idea of persons is a conventional mask. In fact, Buddha himself implicitly believed in karma, a principle of inheritance and continuity which was the parent of all illusions and the substance of our imaginary selves. No doubt, this conception of karma, like the notion of a person, needs to be clarified. But it is a splendid instrument of moral synthesis and describes the operations of substance in one important respect, though doubtless without understanding the mechanism which actually subtends human character and moral inheritance. Knowledge, then, is not knowledge of appearance, but appearances are knowledge of substance when they are taken for signs of it. The stuff and texture of knowledge, its verbal and pictorial terms, are flexible and subject to progressive correction. Thus the notion of matter, of God, of a human person, may continually vary, and may end by shedding completely the specious character it had at first, as, for instance, this Buddhistic notion of what a person really is, namely a moral heritage, is a complete denial of several grosser definitions of a human spirit. But these reformed ideas and new names are meant to be applicable to the same object formerly conceived otherwise. For this reason, they may be truer and better. In like manner, the idea of matter or of God may be reformed. It may even be reformed so radically that a fresh word may be thought necessary to designate the new conception, and the old substance will receive a new name. But controversy is misguided if it turns on hypostatizing either idea and asking which of them exists. The answer is neither. What exists is the substance at work, and this substance is never an idea hypostatized. It is prior to all ideas and descriptions of it, the object that in their rivalry they are all endeavoring to report. In its local modes, or in its broad relations to some human interest, it bears without a murmur whatsoever names any one's tongue and its pathetic spontaneity may impose upon it. Here it is called Mother, there John, there Bow Wow. In one broad aspect, it is called matter. In another, it is called God. When such names, in physics or in theology, are expanded into articulate systems, the question may arise whether they continue to be appropriate to the part or aspect of substance on which they were first bestowed, and this is a doubt for further study to solve, patiently directed upon the same object. A man may then honestly ask himself whether he believes in matter, meaning that he does not regard the conventional notion of matter as certainly applicable to the substance meant, or if he likes to startle the pious, he may say he does not believe in God, because he may not regard the conventional notion of God, or perhaps any notion bred in the region of dramatic emotion, as honestly applicable to the substance actually operative in that sphere, say in the sphere of momentous events and ultimate destiny. Evidently, further study of momentous events and further reflection on destiny might decide this question for him, as further study of physics might decide the other. But whether we think fit to call substance there matter, and substance here God, or invent other names, substance will remain what it is. Our appellations and ideas will have no power to create it where it is not, or to dislodge it, or modify it where it is. Illusions have their own specious reality, a physiognomy, curious as folklore is curious, but it is substance as it exists that is momentous, since it determines events, including our illusions and the disappointments they entail. I should be sorry to think for one moment that any philosopher, much less any religious man, could cling to his beliefs merely because they were his, or he liked them, or had defended them before. Of course, every earnest mind recoils from self-deception and from the thought that its dearest feelings might go up in smoke. Of course, it is singly devoted to discovering the facts, whatever they may be, and to assuming towards them a brave and becoming attitude. My conclusion, accordingly, is this: belief in substance, besides being inevitable in daily life, which I think is the right place for philosophy, is vindicated by the adequacy and harmony of the view it gives us of existence, and the notion that substance is unknowable is reduced to a misunderstanding, intelligible but unfortunate, due to a confusion of knowledge with intuition. If by knowledge we understood an intuition containing no element of faith, but simply inspecting the obvious, then indeed all substance would be unknowable. But this necessary ignorance would then extend to every subsisting fact assumed in science and in daily life. Not only would matter and God disappear from the scene, but the whole past and future would be denied, together with all that flux of experience which social intercourse, psychology, and history presuppose. Nothing would then be knowable save the feeling or image present at the moment to the mind, and even this would not be known for a fact or event in the world, but all that would be known in it or through it would be its own specious nature, the idea presented or the sentiment felt. To limit knowledge to intuition of such obvious essences is to deny knowledge. It is to revoke the whole transitive intention or significance of ideas. The knowledge that mankind claims and rejoices in is of quite another sort. It consists in information about removed facts, intuitively undiscoverable. To a mortal creature, hounded by fate, and not merely engaged in seraphic contemplation, absent things are the things important to know. It is they that have created us, and can now feed or entice us. It is they that our moral nature hangs upon, and looks to with respect. I have sometimes wondered at the value ladies set upon jewels. As centers of light, jewels seem rather trivial and monotonous. And yet there is an unmistakable spell about these pebbles. They can be taken up and turned over. They can be kept. They are faithful possessions. The sparkle of them, shifting from moment to moment, is constant from age to age. They are substances, the same aspects of light and color, if they were homeless in space, or could be spied only once, and irrecoverably, like fireworks, would have a less comfortable charm. In jewels there is the security, the mystery, the inexhaustible fixity proper to substance. After all, perhaps I can understand the fascination they exercise over the ladies. It is the same that the eternal feminine exercises over us. Our contact with them is unmistakable. Our contemplation of them gladly renewed and pleasantly prolonged. Yet in one sense, they are unknowable. We cannot fathom the secret of their constancy, of their hardness, of that perpetual but uncertain brilliancy by which they dazzle us and hide themselves. These qualities of the jewel and of the eternal feminine are also the qualities of substance and of the world. The existence of this world, unless we lapse for a moment into an untenable skepticism, is certain, or at least it is unquestioningly to be assumed. Experience may explore it adventurously, and science may describe it with precision, but after you have wandered up and down in it for many years, and have gathered all you could of its ways, a report, this same world, because it exists substantially and is not invented, remains a foreign thing and a marvel to the spirit, unknowable as a drop of water is unknowable, or unknowable like a person loved.